Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie na spotkaniu zorganizowanym w ramach projektu Liderzy Ekozmian. Ja nazywam się Dominik Sołowy, jestem rzecznikiem projektu i chciałbym dzisiaj zaprosić Państwa do udziału w Akademii Dobrych Praktyk. Dziś postaramy się odpowiedzieć na pytanie, jak dzieją się ekoinnowacje. Zanim przedstawię wszystkich zaproszonych gości, to chciałbym powiedzieć Państwu kilka słów o realizowanym przez nas projekcie. Od listopada 2021 roku do grudnia 2023 Stowarzyszenie Przyjaciół Puszczy Knyszyńskiej Wielki Las wraz z partnerami realizuje projekt Liderzy Ekozmian. Jego celem jest stworzenie pierwszego w Polsce akademickiego Centrum Edukacji i Praktyk Ekologicznych oraz wprowadzenie na stałe do programu nauczania na kierunkach zarządzanie, finanse i rachunkowość oraz administracja nowego przedmiotu pod nazwą empatia ekologiczna. Przedmiot ten uczyć będzie praktyk właściwego gospodarowania zasobami przyrodniczymi. Głównymi odbiorcami projektu są studenci, pracownicy Wyższej Szkoły Finansów i Zarządzania w Białymstoku oraz filii Wełku, a także społeczeństwo województwa podlaskiego, zwłaszcza aglomeracji Białystok. Drodzy Państwo, realizatorzy projektu to Stowarzyszenie Przyjaciół Puszczy Knyszyńskiej Wielki Las, nasz lider. Partnerem jest Park Krajobrazowy Puszczy Knyszyńskiej, partnerem jest również Wyższa Szkoła Finansów i Zarządzania w Białymstoku, Fundacja Centrum Inicjatyw na Rzecz Społeczeństwa oraz Innovation Circle Network Norwegia. Szanowni Państwo, przypadł mi zaszczyt, by w imieniu doktora Edwarda Hościłowicza, rektora Wyższej Szkoły Finansów i Zarządzania, przywitać dzisiejszych gości, przede wszystkim naszych wykładowców oraz opowiedzieć o nich kilka słów. Za moment usłyszycie Państwo, przepraszam, nie powiedziałem jeszcze o ważnej, istotnej rzeczy. Patronami medialnymi naszego projektu jest portal Białystok Online oraz Radio SK i portal sk.pl. Drodzy Państwo, nasze dzisiejsze nagranie jest, jak dobrze wiecie, emitowane na YouTubie. Pytania, które pojawią się w trakcie wykładu, prosimy przesyłać przez czat, w zasadzie poprzez komentarze na YouTubie. Pytania te będą tłumaczone przez naszą tłumaczkę, panią Agnieszkę Prusinowską, i po skończonym wykładzie nasi goście na pewno się do pytań odniosą. Program spotkania wygląda w ten sposób, że nasi goście wygłoszą wykład w języku angielskim, później pani Agnieszka będzie tłumaczyła dla Państwa węzłowe, najważniejsze części tych dwóch wystąpień. Za moment usłyszymy wystąpienie profesora Cliffa Hage'a, który jest emerytowanym profesorem planowania i rozwoju przestrzennego na Uniwersytecie Heriot-Watt w Edynburgu oraz niezależnym badaczem i autorem. Pan profesor obecnie pracuje nad problematyką gospodarki o obiegu zamkniętym i planowaniem przestrzennym Zero Waste w Szkocji. Drugim naszym prelegentem będzie pan Alf Johansen, sekretarz generalny Innovation Circle Network, czyli partnera naszego projektu. I pan Alf jest planistą przestrzennym z Norwegii, zajmujący się na co dzień rozwojem regionalnym i urbanistyką. Dziś panowie spróbują odpowiedzieć nam na pytanie How does eco-innovation happen, czyli jak dzieją się eko-innowacje. Drodzy Państwo, przed nami wystąpienie pana Cliffa Hage'a, profesora z Edynburga. Słuchając, zastanawiajcie się Państwo nad pytaniami, wysyłajcie je nam w komentarzu. My je przetłumaczymy, pan profesor je otrzyma pod koniec wystąpienia i się do nich odniesie. Zapraszam do wykładu.
Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for giving your time to come and listen and join in the discussion on the theme we have today of how does eco-innovation happen. So very pleased to be part of this group and to meet you all. So here is an outline of how I plan to structure the talk. I just hope that not too many of you will finish up like the woman on the photo on the right at the end of it all. So I want to talk first of all about innovation generally and why it matters. I then want to talk about the conditions that favor innovation. In other words, what kind of situations can we create that might make innovation more likely to happen? I talk a bit about circular economy and how that links to territory and to innovation. And within that, there'll be a couple of examples, then some conclusions, and then opportunity for you to put some questions and discussion at the end. So the very traditional model of innovation tends to start with a scientist in a white coat in a laboratory, thinking brilliant new ideas. That becomes the basis for a new technology, and that's then taken forward into production by a company. But that is, as I put there, a very linear approach, a very straight line approach. Research goes to technology, goes to production. And some 30, 35 years or more ago, people began to rethink that because it seemed not to fit with practical realities. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the idea of the triple helix, which is shown in the diagram on the right, where innovation is seen to come from an interplay between government, industry, and academia, universities, research institutes. So the whole point of the argument for triple helix is that it's not a straight line, rather it's the connections that matter, the interconnections across these different forms of institution. So yes, universities and researchers and scientists create new knowledge, but government also has a role, particularly in terms of protecting intellectual property and contracts through a legal system. Government may also be funding some of this research, and industry does the production. So this was the sort of notion that we had in the 1990s. However, it became increasingly clear that in practice, although this sounds good, in practice, it's not certain. There's no guarantee that the three shown in that diagram, government, research, and industry and business, there's no guarantee that they share the same agendas. Quite the reverse. Each often has its own agenda, its own set of priorities that do not necessarily align with those of the other two partners. Also, the criticism was made that the triple helix model overlooks the importance of entrepreneurs, but also of what are called place managers. It all works well if you have the right people there with the right approach, the right openness, the right willingness to try things. But just having government, university, and business around does not actually guarantee that that innovation happens and is carried forward. You need entrepreneurs who are prepared to take the ideas, invest in them, explore new possibilities, maybe change the ideas. But you also need what they call in their place managers, people who will facilitate and actively make the connections between the different institutions that we're concerned with. So often, governments in particular operate in what we call silos. They operate within their own departmental boundaries, and they're often not very open to ideas coming from outside of that department. And that can also be true in universities and in in the business world as well. So the argument was that to move beyond those barriers to more open and innovative arrangements, which allow for the exchange and cross-fertilization of ideas, for the blossoming of new ideas by sowing those ideas, the seeds of those ideas somewhere else, then somebody outside these three traditional structures has to play a role, or can at least increase the possibilities of innovation if there is that sort of individual or agency operating. So putting this into a diagram, you can see that we've moved away from the straight line, and instead we've got this circular pattern which can move in either direction, connecting knowledge from inside a company to development of that knowledge with stakeholders who may be customers or investors, then linking in, as we can see, eventually back to the through the research sector back to knowledge from outside the company that then feeds in again. So the idea is that innovation is a sort of iterative process. It's a process that isn't a straight line, but one that is going round and round and round, adapting and changing as it goes forward. And a key part of that is the interaction between practice and research. So work with outsiders is one of the messages, and connect the research world with the practice world. That's another of the messages. And I've tried to sum it up in this oval here on the left, which says that innovation is a complex process. It's not a simple straight line that feeds on interaction, a key word, interaction, between people with overlapping aims. You've got some aims in common, but different types of background, different types of experience. So it's the crossover points that are really important, that spark innovation. So you need to build networks and systems and agencies that can do that, that can help make it more likely that there will be crossovers. And at the crossover points, you get the new idea. You connect, in our case, perhaps ecological action or ecological understanding with a business process, or with a group in civil society, or with all three. And this is how the knowledge idea moves forward. Also, within this rethink that took place in some 20 years ago, was the idea that some knowledge is explicit. In other words, it's the sort of thing that you can read in books, in documents, check on databases, conventional way of accessing knowledge in some ways. But also, what we call tacit knowledge is very important. And tacit knowledge is much more elusive, much more difficult to pin down just what it is. It's partly intuitive, it's partly know-how, it's partly experience. It's knowledge that's shaped by context, by the world in which people are working or experiencing things. It's about the values that are in that, how far things like excellence and innovation are prioritized. It's often hard to communicate tacit knowledge. People may have a lot of tacit knowledge, but not be a very good communicator. And so the knowledge stays locked in their head, but never quite transfers to spark somebody else off. And the best form of long-term competitive advantage and innovation is seen to be with tacit knowledge. And how does this happen? It happens through a chat over a cup of coffee, a chance meeting a networking event after a conference, something like that. And this argument was really put forward, perhaps partly, as you can see from the slide, in opposition to the idea that information technology was really going to drive the whole innovation process. So it's saying that tacit knowledge, the broad base of the pyramid, is actually what keeps the thing going. So learning then becomes key to turning tacit knowledge into innovation. So you can have tacit knowledge, you can have the knowledge of experience, but unless you're learning about that, unless you're looking at what works and what doesn't work, at what changes are happening that might restructure that knowledge, unless there's that openness, innovation will not happen. Now, the one thing I've added also on this slide, as you'll see in the top left, is that this was put together before ideas came to the fore of big data. And big data now is transforming the area of explicit knowledge. So we might actually slightly restructure the balance there. And certainly it's one of the issues, I think, to think about as we go forward, how far big data forces us to rethink some of the tacit knowledge that we have, the potential of big data. So by about 10 years ago, there was a lot of interest in the idea of regional innovation, and the triple helix idea had been extended into this fourfold set of relationships not just between the universities, business and governments, but also involving civil society. And this is clearly important in terms of when we discuss eco-innovation, because, as you know, much of the impetus and drive of the ecological movement has come from civil society, often dragging governments and businesses some way behind them. So the idea that you need all four partners to be involved to optimize the potential for innovation is an important one to hold on to. So we need to bring those four together. And as that article that I just had up on the screen there shows, a quote from there: when all four sectors act together, they can pull and push one another into game-changing collaboration beyond what any of them can achieve alone. So there's this dynamism that comes if you can get the four sets of partners operating together, some advocating, maybe some pulling people who are more reluctant to move. It's this process of interaction that can create great added value in the innovation process. So I pose the question, what conditions favor innovation, and highlight the need to manage these relationships. So we've got the four that I just had on the previous slide around the square there, and the extra ingredient then is what is called context management. So it's again some individuals or agencies who can make sure that the connections are made between these groups, who can oil the wheels, if you like, make the innovation engine function effectively by making the contacts, raising questions, suggesting new possibilities. So as you can see, what we started off with a three-way triple helix has become now a sort of five-way quintuple helix, five interactive elements. But the context management role is important. And in the end, a lot depends on individuals, and Alf may talk something about this later. I know the Innovation Circle at times has talked about souls on fire. A lot depends on conditions, within a city, a region, or the personal characteristics of people in any of those sectors that we saw in the previous slides. So what makes creativity, what makes the light bulb light up, the spark of idea and inspiration? Well, it's the capacity to be puzzled, to be curious, to start asking questions. Why this? Why not that? Also an ability to concentrate, to follow something through. Sometimes it's hard going, stick at it. An ability to accept that there will be conflict and there will be tension. You know, human beings don't always agree with each other. Not everybody thinks your idea is the greatest thing they've ever heard. So it's a case of learning to listen as well as to talk, and to work to resolve tensions, because although tension can be creative, it can also be destructive. So we need to make sure that you can cope with conflict and tension. Courage and faith, believe in the possibilities of your set out by your own values and by the path that you're seeking to move towards. Very important, a willingness to explore and to take risks. If you just work within everything that's been done before, you don't get innovation. Boldness, ambition, big ideas, try it. And spontaneity. There's a lot to be said for short-term experiments that don't cost much, that you monitor them and you see what happens. And if they work, you scale them up. If they don't work, okay, we tried it, it didn't work, no big deal. So these set of attitudes are likely to help a process of innovation take place. And within this, which leads to tacit understanding, is the idea of mutual trust. You have to build trust amongst the partners. Without mutual trust, partners will only do what is in their own interest, and they will focus on the short term, not the long term. And trust is generally built up gradually through ongoing contacts. And that, I think, has been a key part of the work of Innovation Circle. And again, Alf may touch on that. We've not collaborated on just what he's going to say, but it certainly seems to me that some of these qualities have been embedded through the work of Innovation Circle, embedded amongst the partners. Now, I had the word earlier, I think, sort of regional innovation. And one point I want to make is that there's a connection between innovation and place or territory or region. Some of this is recognized in what we call agglomeration economies, which basically say big cities have got advantages for competitiveness of business. As I put up there, urban centers are most likely to have universities. They're most likely to have businesses with people who can take key investment decisions. They're places where it's easier to access money. And they also are likely to have stronger government bodies that have got some weight to put behind new ideas. So all of this means that in general, innovation disproportionately takes place in larger urban centers, because all these things that I've just listed mean that the spillovers of knowledge, the sharing of knowledge, that movement across the boundaries beyond the silos, that cross-fertilization, all the things I've been saying in the last 20 minutes or so are more likely to happen in urban areas than in big urban areas than in rural areas. So if you're looking for ways to develop innovation, one thing is to look at what are the assets of the cities that you're in and how you can begin to mobilize them. So we talk about regional innovation systems that connect institutional resources, such as enterprises and organizations and R&D, territorial resources on the right, that's the things that are there in the place, maybe, you know, a legacy of a particular type of industry, or, you know, high quality countryside, whatever it might be. But the place assets, the relational resources are really the networks that exist that you can tap into. And the intangible resources, again, tacit knowledge, codified knowledge, and a network culture, a culture shared within a region, which brings together different players to explore ways that their agendas can overlap and lead to change. And this, I think, fits well. The whole idea of circular economy fits the whole idea, of innovation, and these circular processes, this incremental, iterative process of change, learning, adapting, moving forward, being prepared to innovate. All of this, I think, mirrors the pattern of a circular economy. And I guess most people are familiar, again, that we're talking about a move away from a takeaway economy, a linear economy, where you take materials out of the ground, you make something, you use it, and then you throw it away. Instead, the circular economy is about making, using, and recycling, and also perhaps even a stage before that, about preventing, if you can, the consumption of finite resources. So how do we look at examples of circular economy as a form of eco-innovation? Well, I'm just doing some work at the moment, as I think was said at the start, with a Scottish agency called Zeroway Scotland, which is a government-funded agency. And the Scottish government, in another stream of its work, has produced a sort of what's called national planning framework. It's a bit like a national spatial plan for Scotland, and it's consulting on it. And it's very good to see that in that national spatial planning document, there's mention of a circular economy. But the definition of the circular economy in that document is quite narrow, and that's the one on the left. So it says a circular economy is one that's designed to reduce the demand for raw material in products, to encourage reuse, repair, and manufacture by designing products and materials to last as long as possible in line with the waste hierarchy. And so this is the approach. And what I'm suggesting is, on the right, a rather different definition, which is more broader, more holistic. So it's not just about products, but it's about places, and it's about a whole range of materials. It's about economics as well as about landfill. And the aim through that is to rethink the way that we approach connecting circular economy into spatial planning, into planning of towns and regions and cities. And so in doing this piece of work, which has really been asked to look at how to strengthen the circular economy dimension in the National Spatial Plan, we're actually crossing this boundary between a science of waste and waste management, and a practice of waste management, and businesses involved in it, and on the other hand, a set of planners, if you like, government bureaucrats sitting there in their offices, deciding on traditional place-based policies. So again, what you're trying to do is get innovation by crossing over a boundary between the two and connecting that ultimately then from national government down to local government, and from local government with business and developers who are engaged in the development process. So there's a strong place dimension to innovation. I've talked about agglomeration. We've talked a little bit about land-based factors. And although I say that agglomeration generally gives you advantages for the possibility of innovation, we shouldn't underplay the advantages also that rural regions have in terms of their land resources, their natural resources, blue and green, water and landscape and soil, forests. So it's a case again of trying to see what is the context of the place, what are the institutions in the place, and again, how can you get these relationships going? How can you link the land factors with agglomeration factors, with hard factors like technology and knowledge, and create an environment which favors an innovative way of thinking, a risk-taking, entrepreneurial approach to ecological change. So, as I said, it's not just a case of the big cities, important as they are, but the natural biosystems in rural regions can also be an important basis for eco-innovation. So I'm moving towards the end. I'm just going to give a couple of examples of very different approaches in two very different places. The first one is in the Ruhr, the traditional industrial heartland of Germany. This is a very famous example, and I'm sure some of you will have heard it before, so forgive me. But in the 1980s, de-industrialization, massive industrial closures, in what was not just a highly industrial region, but a highly polluting region. And the approach taken by the regional authorities was to radically rethink the nature of their region and see how that industrial legacy could be turned into a much cleaner regional park. So what happened? How was this transformation achieved? The state government, the land of the region, set up an international building exhibition, which is quite a German type of institution. But it covered a huge area, 17 cities, 2 million population. So it was a form of innovation that we call imitative innovation. It wasn't totally new, but it was reworking a different practice in a different context. So the aim was to reuse land and clean water and clean the water systems, to repair, adapt and reuse buildings, and to, throughout it, set high standards for ecologically sound construction and production. And yes, there was big money involved in this, but big money was needed to clear up this legacy of 100 years of industrialism. So that money came up front from the regional government, from the European Union, but also money came in from private companies when they saw what was being done. And again, it's very often necessary for the public sector to build or rebuild the confidence of private investors by showing that the public sector is really seriously committed to an ecological project. Also in this case, in the Ruhr, there was extensive consultation with environmental groups, professional bodies, residents, tapping that tacit knowledge that we talked about earlier. And throughout it, the organization ensured shared rules, mutual learning, sharing the learning. Now, a very different example, but again, in its own way, I think very interesting, is from Bologna in Italy. And again, it's perhaps no coincidence that Bologna historically has been a city that has a reputation for innovative governance and ideas. And there, in the late 1990s, as I've written on the slide, this organization formed, Campi Aperti, Open Fields, a group of organic farmers and consumers who wanted organic products, promoted the idea and delivery of a street market each week, where there would be direct sales of farm products to people in the city. And it's built from that. So they organize initiatives, awareness campaigns, they work with other groups. They particularly, again, this crossover idea, this learning from your customers, They develop dialogues between producers and consumers, and they spread knowledge and learning about organic farming techniques, eco-compatible production, and sustainable natural resources. So it's basically an interface between farmers and customers, between countryside and city, but an eco-innovation. And it began as a small project, a seed project, an experiment, if you like, collaborating with the university. So again, we've got this idea of the crossover between the farm businesses and the university. And it was about seeds that were being used by the farmers, so that they could get greater power within the seed market and choose seeds that were more organic, more friendly to organic techniques, and would safeguard biodiversity, and therefore also help to adapt to climate change over the long term. And they produced a charter of principles and a guarantee system. So built, again, this keyword trust. So there was documents that helped build trust, working together built trust between them as producers and between them and customers, and provided quality assurance. So what you've got is a change from a more industrialized agricultural system to one with shorter supply chains, less what we call food kilometers, less distance being traveled by food between production and consumption. An interpersonal dimension, people knowing the producers, meeting them, a socialization of consumption in relation to food. It becomes a shared effort between producers and consumers. And I put on the bottom there the link if you want to see the article in full, because my time's running out. So finally, there can be, I've argued, there can be different approaches to eco-innovation. MSHA is very top-down, despite the participation, but it's a big project, top-down, multi-sectoral, large-scale. Campia Aperta is the opposite. It's bottom-up. It's just the food sector, much smaller scale. But in both cases, we see similar features, which are what I emphasized at the start of the lecture. Different actors sharing the same ideals, trust, and sympathetic political institutions, those creative managers at the center of one of those diagrams we saw. And creativity is a key part of this in terms of the human resource. In the end, you need creative people to make all this happen. So thanks very much for listening to me. I hope that has been helpful.
Panie profesorze, bardzo dziękuję. Dear professor, thank you for your lecture. Drodzy Państwo, na chwilę obecną nie mamy, przepraszam, co z moją kamerą, na chwilę obecną nie mamy tutaj kwestii związanych z czatem, więc przejdziemy na moment do drugiego wykładu. Ja tylko też gwoli informacji przekażę Państwu cenny komunikat, że nasz projekt Liderzy Ekozmian jest sfinansowany przez Islandię, Liechtenstein i Norwegię z Funduszu Europejskiego Obszaru Gospodarczego w ramach programu Aktywni Obywatele Fundusz Regionalny. I projekt dofinansowany został w kwocie ponad 114 000 euro. To taka ważna informacja, którą chcemy się z Państwem podzielić i pochwalić. A teraz do wykładu, wygłoszenia wykładu zapraszam pana Alfa Johansena, przypomnę Państwu sekretarza generalnego Innovation Circle Network, a więc partnera naszego projektu. Pan Alf był kierownikiem kilku projektów finansowanych przez Unię Europejską, w których zaangażowanych było wiele krajów, więc serdecznie zapraszam do wysłuchania tego wykładu. Alf, please start your lecture.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to say some words here. Now, Professor Cliff Hague, he has made an introduction to the innovation system as such, and I think he pointed out a lot of important issues, how the system must work and how it can work in different ways. I would like to just add some few remarks about the eco-leadership, because one thing is to have an innovative system, but what about the management? What about the leadership? So I want to just show very few slides. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, first of all, you need to ask yourself, if you're going to do eco-leadership, why are you going to do this? What is the motivation? Why do we need eco-leadership? Everyone is talking about these things these days, but what is it? What is it so important for you if you're going to be a leader of eco change? I think that is important to answer, to understand the motivation, and also what values, what is the content of your eco leadership. What are you trying to bring on that is not here already? And thirdly, how? What kind of organization do you have? What tools are you going to use? Are you going to use traditional, let's say, industrial tools? Or are you going to use artificial intelligence? Or are you going to do networking and so on? You have to have some ideas about how to approach this eco-leadership. The next slide, please. If you look at this slide, you will see that eco innovation is consists of two parts. One is basically technological change, what can be done by technological change and technological innovation. And there is also a non-technological change. And you see that the non-technological change has a high potential, but it's more difficult to coordinate. So then you need to build an organization. You need to think about marketing methods, and even maybe you need to build institutions in order to achieve this non-technological change. I'll just show this very shortly. So next slide, please. Of course, what are the overall goals for the eco innovation? Well, you know the United Nations 17 goals. They are like pointed out 17 elements which are like a global goals. They kind of give the direction for the eco change and the green shift. And you will find some of these goals also in the European Union politics, in your national plans, and I suppose also in your regional plans, and even for your local governments and non-governmental organizations. They will also link up to these overall goals. And then there is the next slide, the goal number 15. It's about the life on land. It's a lot about the forest, and also the biodiversity, and how to do the eco innovation, so you take care of the biodiversity, and also the circular economy, for instance. How can that be used in a way that is sustainable? And for example, in Norway, we have a lot of energy production. We have a more traditional linear economy connected to the oil and gas production, where we just empty our resources, and one day it has to stop because there are no resources left. Then we also have a circular economy connected to our very huge hydropower resources. So they are very sustainable resources. They are a very big part of our electricity supply, etc. And also the forest. We have quite a lot of forest in Norway, and we try to see how this forestry can be worked with in order to grow biomass, to biofuel, etc., but also how to use it in the construction sector in new ways. And then there is a very big potential for innovation within that sector. So I can just show you one more slide where you see how the ecosystem actually in Norway is organized, or how it works. And you see this green part here is the forest. It covers 38% of the land. But you see, there can be a difference between how big part of the area one type of the ecosystem has, but how much carbon will it contain. For instance, if you look at this brown sector, they're called wetlands. It covers only 9% of the territory, but it contains 22% of the carbon. So that's very important to take care of these wetlands, as they are very big. You can say that they obtain and keep the CO2 in a very good way. So then the last slide I have is the next page. You will see that in Norway there is a discussion about the fertilization, for example, of the forest. How smart is it to add nitrogen to grow forest and biomass faster? This is a big discussion. Some experts think it's smart to add nitrogen. Some think it's not smart. I'm not an expert in that field, but I just see that there are different ways of thinking. But during the last years, we see that the fertilization of the forest is more and more, and that is an issue, at least, to look into. I will not show more of these slides, but just want to add in the final that to work with eco innovation and eco leadership, you need to let's say use and apply principles of which is modern, which is state of the art management methods, to include your associates, to have good dialogue, to share info, to apply democratic principles, etc. And first of all, last of all, to keep the innovative spirit high, so people can dare to come forward with new ideas, and that there is a thriving, that the people have a good, let's say, feeling about acting innovative. So that was probably my last comments. So thank you very much for this this session. Thank you.
Dear Al, thank you for your lecture. Drodzy Państwo, teraz nadszedł czas, by pani Agnieszka Prosinowska, nasza tłumaczka, podsumowała wystąpienia profesora Cliffa Hage'a i pana Alfa Johansena. Agnieszko, oddaję głos.
Witam wszystkich serdecznie, nazywam się Agnieszka Prosinowska, jestem pracownikiem Parku Krajobracowego Puszczy Knyszyńskiej i spróbujemy w tej chwili krótko podsumować w języku polskim wykłady, które przed chwilą usłyszeliśmy. A więc w pierwszym, How does eco-innovation happens? Dowiadujemy się na początku o tym, w jaki sposób tradycyjnie wyglądało dążenia do innowacji, czyli mieliśmy tu układ liniowy, który w latach 90. został zastąpiony potrójną spiralą, gdzie działania akademickie, rządowe i biznesowe łączyły się w jakiejś części, ale ostatecznie niestety ich działania nie zawsze łączyły się ze sobą na tyle, aby ta ekoinnowacja mogła rzeczywiście zadziałać. Te ich części wspólne po prostu były zbyt małe, aby można było coś osiągnąć. Zaczęto zastanawiać się, w jaki sposób można udoskonalić ten proces, tak aby dawał gwarancję faktycznie osiągnięcia zapotrzebowania na innowacje. Elementami, które okazało się, że są bardzo istotnymi, była praca z osobami z zewnątrz, łączenie praktyki z badaniami oraz interakcja między ludźmi z podobnymi celami, ale o różnym pochodzeniu i doświadczeniach. W ten sposób powstał nam ten schemat, na którym widzimy 4 postaci podtrzymujące miasto. Jest to rząd, całe środowisko akademickie, biznes i społeczeństwo. Dzięki połączeniu tych 4 elementów możemy dużo więcej osiągnąć. Dzięki temu, że każdy z nich ma jakąś swoją wiedzę, każdy z nich ma jakieś swoje możliwości i dzięki kooperacji, dzięki działaniu razem możemy zrobić znacznie więcej, niż mogłaby zrobić zaledwie jedna jednostka. Była również mowa o tym, jak ważna jest nauka, gdyż każdy z nas ma jakąś swoją wrodzoną wiedzę, ale bardzo często nie potrafimy jej wyartykułować. I to jest podstawa tego schematycznego trójkąta, czyli ta nasza taka jakby intuicja, którą dzięki nauce możemy wyartykułować, dzięki czemu tworzymy dane, tworzymy wiedzę, z której później może korzystać ktoś następny i w ten sposób powstaje innowacja. Bardzo ważne w tym takim układzie biznes, społeczeństwo, uniwersytety i rząd są również pytania, czyli potrzebni są ludzie, którzy te pytania będą zadawać, dzięki czemu powstanie innowacja. Ponieważ nie wystarczy tylko i wyłącznie skupiać się na tym, co jest w tej chwili, a bez tych pytań nie zrodzą się nam nowe pomysły. Dlatego potrzebna jest kreatywność, osoby, które ciągle wymyślają coś nowego. Zazwyczaj są to osoby, które są bardzo odporne na konflikty i spięcia, które prędzej czy później pojawiają się w każdej grupie. Potrafią się skupiać, potrafią odpuścić wtedy, kiedy ich pomysł nie do końca spełnia oczekiwania. Są to osoby również spontaniczne i potrafiące dostosować się do każdej sytuacji. Bardzo ważne w całym tym układzie, w całej tej współpracy jest zaufanie. Wszystkie strony muszą sobie ufać, nie ma takiej możliwości, aby któraś ze stron zaczęła ukrywać jakieś informacje, inaczej ta innowacja nie ma sensu. Bardzo ważnym elementem przy innowacji jest miejsce. Na początku profesor mówił o tym, jak ważne są miasta z prostego powodu. Mamy tam ostatnio popularne parki innowacyjne, więcej firm, dostęp do uniwersytetów, dostęp do większych pieniędzy. To wszystko daje nam większe możliwości do tego, aby faktycznie te innowacje mogły powstawać. Tutaj też pojawia się jeszcze temat obiegu naszych produktów, które mamy w gospodarce. Na początku była to liniowa gospodarka, gdzie tylko braliśmy, wytwarzaliśmy i rzeczy wytworzone zostawały wyrzucone. W tej chwili dążymy do tego, aby ten obieg był zamknięty, czyli wytwarzane produkty są używane, a później oddawane do recyklingu, tak, aby możliwie jak najmniej eksploatować nasze zasoby. Ważne jest również to, aby naprawiać i już na samym początku, podczas projektowania, wybierać takie projekty i takie materiały, aby mogły one przetrwać możliwie jak najdłużej. Później mieliśmy jeszcze kilka definicji dotyczących tego obiegu zamkniętego w gospodarce. Między innymi była tam mowa o tym, iż gospodarka obieg zamknięty w gospodarce ma na celu odwrócenie procesu degradacji lub wyczerpania ograniczonych zasobów, a tym samym sprawiedliwe zróżnicowanie zarządzania budynkami i zasobami środowiska naturalnego. W dalszej części dowiadujemy się, że oczywiście nie tylko miasto jest istotnym miejscem, w którym ta ekoinnowacja może zachodzić. Powinniśmy korzystać również z regionów przemysłowych i również wiejskich. Tak naprawdę najważniejszym momentem jest to, aby zastanowić się, do czego tak naprawdę nam to miejsce jest potrzebne, jaki rodzaj innowacji będziemy mieli na myśli i do tego dobrać to miejsce, które rzeczywiście jak najbardziej dopasuje się do naszych potrzeb. Na koniec wykładu mieliśmy dwa przykłady. Jeden taki typowo na dużą skalę, drugi na znacznie mniejszy, ale one świetnie pokazują tą ekoinnowację, w jaki sposób ona może wyglądać. Pierwszy przykład pochodził z Niemiec. Związane to było z powstaniem parku Emscher. Polegało to na tym, że zanieczyszczone miasto zostało jakby przemyślane na nowo dzięki współpracy wszystkich tych wymienionych wcześniej jednostek. I tak rząd landu w latach 80. zorganizował międzynarodową wystawę budynków, dzięki czemu ponownie przemyślano, w jaki sposób można używać grunty z terenów. Oczyszczono wody, naprawiono, wyremontowano, zaadoptowano domy i budynki. W całym tym przedsięwzięciu udział wzięło 17 miast, 2 miliony mieszkańców. Zajmowało to obszar ponad 800 km². Drugim przykładem na mniejszą skalę były campi aperti w Bolonii, czyli taki pomysł na to, w jaki sposób rolnicy i konsumenci mogą ze sobą współpracować. Była to promocja cotygodniowych targów ulicznych i bezpośredniej sprzedaży od rolników, dzięki czemu rolnictwo ekologiczne miało większą możliwość na rozwój. Myślę, że to wystarczy. Tym bardziej, że też ten wykład, z tego co wiem, to jest nagrany i będzie dla Państwa udostępniony, więc myślę, że nie będziemy tego przedłużać. Tym bardziej, że w drugim wykładzie tak naprawdę mieliśmy podsumowanie tego wykładu wcześniejszego, także nic nowego tam nie było.
Jeśli Państwo pozwolicie, to ja zadam 2 pytania do profesora Cliffa Hage'a. Dear professor, I hope you are online. Yes. What are the main barriers to sector? Is our professor online? Yes. Dear professor, what are the main barriers to sector collaboration in creating innovation? That is my first question. And the second one is, can you tell us a bit more about working on zero waste projects in Scotland? Please turn off your microphone. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, I think the main barriers are that quite understandably, different organizations, institutions have different priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you look at something like health service, very big sector in any society, their focus is on health very often as treating illness, much less often as prevention of ill health. And they also have a lot of buildings and sites which they manage. And so they're often focused on getting better sites and selling existing sites for, if they're in an urban area, and often hospitals had grounds, parks, gardens around them. So very often they've got significant land resources. So they will tend to just see that as a commercial asset that can be converted into money because they're always short of money. But those kind of premises are also good for creating health by open spaces, trees, parkland, fresh air, carbon reduction through the trees, all these things which feed into good health, but can often not be seen by the health authority as actually a health issue. So they operate within their own barriers, within their own set of outlooks. So I think that's one difficulty. And if people then come along and say, well, think of the ecological value of this land, it's low down on their priorities. They may not be hostile, but they won't share the priority that the ecologists would put on it. So I think that's one problem, and it comes up with that's just one example, but you could probably repeat it. Transport people want to build roads and speed the flow of traffic. So again, it's difficult to get them to think differently about the ecological side of things. But then in the end, as I said in the talk, you also need to have responsive individuals and creative individuals. So you can have a situation where there's an agreement to cooperate perhaps between two bodies, but if the people involved in it are simply going through the motions, just not really committed to the idea of cooperation, it still won't get very far. So there's personal level, but there's also institutional level that are barriers. And at a wider societal level, we know that the significance of things like climate change has not really been given the importance that it needs. So there's been a tendency to assume that yes, we can do something about that, but it's long into the future. In fact, all the evidence is that action needs to be taken in the short term. It's not just a long-term problem. So you have, again, government setting targets for carbon reduction, for example, 30, 40 years from now, very good, but what are you going to do now? And too often these targets can be a way of avoiding the harder choices about short-term action. So I think there's a number of barriers, but they're the main ones I would say is individual attitudes, institutional silos, and an overarching lack of a sense of urgency of the ecological dimension of the multiple crises that we now face. What I'm doing with Zeroway Scotland, I said briefly, Zeroway Scotland is an agency. You can see the website. It encourages, reuse, recycling, prevention, etc. I'm a professionally, I'm a territorial planner, urban and regional planner. And when every 5 years or so, Scotland has produced a sort of national strategy, national planning strategy. So this is the fourth version of it now that we're moving into. And it's for the first time that that national strategy has started talking about a circular economy. So that's kind of good. But the people at Zeroway Scotland, who got an ecological background, they don't know enough about regional development, urban and regional development. They don't know enough about how land use planning systems, spatial planning systems work. So they were glad to see mention of circular economy in this document, but they also sensed that it was inadequate, the discussion in the document, because it tended to see circular economy just as about reducing rubbish, just as about reducing landfill. So it says some good things about that, but it doesn't see, for example, the scope to introduce industrial symbiosis plants. It doesn't talk about things I touched upon there about, understanding the spatial dimension, if you like, of a circular economy. So, for example, for some waste recycling, it has to be done at a certain scale to be commercially viable. So that's going to influence where you put collection points, how you organize your networks. And on development, it doesn't really fully, as strongly as it could do, make the case for reusing materials. And in particular, it doesn't overall have an approach towards environmental conservation, which in a circular economy view would drive the whole report. So what I'm doing is really going through this document, liaising with people in Zeroway Scotland, and seeing if there are ways that we can, shape the final version of the document so that it more fully embraces a circular economy viewpoint. And I think if we do it, it will be really interesting, because at the moment there's a lot of other examples out there which people perhaps in the circular economy sector are familiar with, but people in the planning sector are not familiar with. So it's a case of trying to make this connection and crossover.
Professor, thank you. Thank you for your answers. I have another question to Alf Johansen. Alf, could you tell me something? What was the most difficult part of implementing eco-innovations in Norway?
Well, it's a big question.
I think so.
Yeah, I would say that The problem maybe, if you look at it in a large scale, is of course to get the society and the decision makers to understand that it's a need for eco-innovation. Because it took a while before they started to understand that now we have to do something. So Norway was not so, let's say, maybe we were not so late, but not in the first line either. So we kind of step by step understood that we have to do something, because we have a lot of space in Norway, but we have very little, for example, agricultural land compared to the size of the country. We have a lot of rocks, we have a lot of wild nature, but we have to take care of our resources. And I would say now there is a better climate for doing these projects, and even the Norwegian Research Council and other instruments are rigged and ready to finance some of these projects. And we try to work with the EU programs like Horizon and other programs. So we try to pool the money, so to say, and we even have this Norwegian instrument of financing that is an agreement between EU and Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein, where we go in with money to fund eco change projects in other countries, like in Poland in this case. So I would say that step by step Norway is coming on into this field, but we have still a long way to go. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Drodzy Państwo, będziemy finalizowali dzisiejsze spotkanie. Chciałbym Państwa zachęcić oczywiście do odwiedzenia strony Wyższej Szkoły Finansów i Zarządzania wsfiz.edu.pl/liderzy-eko-zmian. Tam znajdziecie Państwo informacje o projekcie. Też ważne jest to, że w ramach naszego projektu Liderzy Eko-Zmian uczestnicy między innymi odbędą praktyki w Parku Krajobrazowym Puszczy Knyszyńskiej, odbędzie się trening monitoringu obywatelskiego w ekologii oraz pracę w studiu ekoinfluencerów, a cała społeczność, rodziny, mieszkańcy regionu wezmą udział w otwartych imprezach i tak już wkrótce odbędą się pierwsze mistrzostwa ploggingu, czyli biegu po terenach leśnych i nie tylko, w trakcie którego będziemy zbierali śmieci. Festiwal dla Matki Ziemi to także jest element naszej imprezy. Dzięki praktykom i współpracy z Innovation Ecological Center będziemy mogli przygotować podręcznik i bank wiedzy ekolidera. Drodzy Państwo, bardzo dziękuję za dzisiejsze spotkanie. Moim Państwa gościem był profesor Cliff Hague i pan Alf Johansen z Innovation Circle Network. Professor, Mr. Alf, thank you for your participation in our workshop. Your lectures was very interesting, so I hope we will meet together in another meeting.
Thank you very much.
Drodzy Państwo, też bardzo serdecznie dziękuję. Życzę wspaniałego, dobrego, piątkowego wieczoru. No i zachęcam do odwiedzania naszych stron, także Facebooka naszego projektowego. Właśnie wyświetla się Państwu adres Liderzy Eko-Zmian. Tam wszystkie aktualności na bieżąco będziemy zamieszczali. Niektóre informacje są również na Instagramie Wyższej Szkoły Finansów i Zarządzania. Pozdrawiam Państwa bardzo serdecznie. Do usłyszenia, do zobaczenia. Dziękuję.